You know that feeling when you've actually said the words, I'm just not a math person. Well, you're definitely not alone. But what if I told you that feeling, it probably wasn't your fault? What if it was baked into the way we were all taught math? Today, we're going to break down a whole new way of thinking about early math education, one that's backed by a ton of research. It's all about moving past just memorizing formulas and instead building kids who are confident, capable problem solvers. Right, so before we can fix things, we really have to get our heads around the problem. And for millions of us, it starts really, really early with this powerful and honestly often paralyzing feeling, math anxiety. And look, this is way more than just not liking a subject. It's a real cognitive barrier that can completely derail learning before it even gets off the ground. And here's the thing that's just staggering: the sheer scale of this problem. Get this. Research shows that about half of all elementary school kids experience math anxiety. Yeah, 50%. So this isn't some high school or college thing. No, this cycle starts for a lot of kids in kindergarten, and it can totally shape their relationship with numbers for the rest of their lives. So how does this even happen? Well, researchers have a name for it, the vicious spiral. And it goes something like this. It all starts with just one moment of difficulty, right? That little struggle sparks anxiety. And what does that anxiety do? It literally hijacks the part of your brain you need to solve the problem, your working memory. So what happens next? Avoidance. The kid might act out, or suddenly need to go to the nurse, or just shut down completely. And we all know math builds on itself, so that avoidance means they start falling behind, which of course just confirms their biggest fear: I can't do this. And that creates even more anxiety. It's just a brutal, devastating feedback loop. Okay, but here's the good news. And it is really good news. We can absolutely break that cycle. The research points to this really powerful, integrated framework for teaching math that's built on 3 pillars that all depend on each other. Let's dig into how they all work together to build a totally new foundation for learning. So the whole solution has 3 main parts, and they all have to work together. Think of it like this. First up is context. That's the how. We teach math using real-world stuff. Then there's affect. That's the why. It's all about managing the emotional side of things and stopping anxiety in its tracks. And finally, cognition. This is the support, giving targeted, science-backed help for kids who really need it. All right, let's dive into that first pillar, context. And honestly, this is a huge shift in how we think about teaching math. For years, the model was learn an abstract procedure like long division, and then you get a word problem to practice. Well, this new way completely flips the script. We teach the math through the problem itself. Here's a perfect example of what I mean. In the old school model, what do kids do? They number pluck, right? They just grab the numbers from a word problem and kind of guess what to do with them. But check this out. With something called a numberless word problem, you start with just the story. Some students were on the bus. Then some students got off. That's it. See? It forces the kids to first understand the action in the story. Oh, this is a getting smaller story, before a single number even shows up. Comprehension comes way before calculation. It's a game changer. And you can take this idea and blow it up into entire units of study. This farm-to-market narrative, it's a perfect example. So in the farm part, the whole project is about the math of production. Kids are designing gardens, figuring out area and perimeter, learning about measurement, all in a context that makes sense. Then you move to the market unit, and it's all about the math of transaction. They sell what they grew, learning about money, adding and subtracting, real-world finance stuff. Now, the most important part of all this is that it's not just some feel-good idea. It is backed by some seriously powerful evidence. Researchers use this metric called an effect size to measure how well a teaching strategy works. And let me just tell you, these numbers are huge. To put it in perspective, anything over about 0.40 is considered pretty good. We're talking 0.90, even 1.11. This stuff has a massive, measurable impact on how well students do. Bottom line, these methods flat out work. And all of this, teaching through real-world problems, naturally leads us to our second pillar, effect, the emotional side of things. See, just by teaching with context, we're already using one of the best strategies out there to prevent math anxiety. But we can also be way more direct and intentional about creating a classroom culture that shifts the vibe from fear to growth. Okay, so the first step is just being able to spot it. And there are some really clear, observable signs to look for. Avoidance is a huge one. You know, the kid who suddenly has to go to the nurse or the bathroom only during math class. Freezing is another big tell. That's when a kid just stares blankly.
It's a real physiological stress response that's blocking their brain from working. And of course, hearing kids say things like, "I'm just bad at math," that's a direct cry for help.
So what's the antidote? It's all about creating what's known as a growth mindset classroom. This means you literally teach kids that their brain is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. It means we start celebrating mistakes, not as failures, but as proof that learning is actually happening. And this part is crucial. It means we have to get rid of things like those timed mad minute tests. The research is crystal clear on this. They are a major source of stress and anxiety for kids. And the words we use are incredibly powerful too. Picture this, a kid is struggling. Our first instinct might be to say something comforting like, "Hey, it's okay, math is hard for a lot of people." But it turns out that's actually one of the worst things you can say. It just reinforces that "I'm bad at math" idea. Instead, the research points to a much better three-part message. First, you acknowledge the struggle. "I can see this step is tricky." Then you express confidence, "But I know you can work through it." And finally, you offer a strategy. "Let's try drawing a picture of the problem." See the difference? It's huge. Okay, that brings us to our third and final pillar, cognition. Because look, a positive classroom that uses real-world problems is absolutely essential for all students. But for some kids, there are specific neurological hurdles that require a whole different level of targeted support. What we're talking about here is something called dyscalculia. You can think of it as being like dyslexia, but for numbers. It affects about 3 to 6% of the population, and it's a real neurological issue with the person's number sense, that gut feeling for what numbers mean. And it is so important to understand this. It has absolutely nothing to do with how smart a kid is or how hard they're trying. And with this, spotting it early is everything. Here are a few key things to look for in those early grades. And again, it's not just about being a little slow. We're talking about things like still needing to count on their fingers for a simple sum like 3 plus 2, long after all their friends have stopped, or having real trouble just looking at two numbers and telling you which one is bigger without having to count. These are big red flags. So if a student needs help, what's the best way to do it? Well, there are two main schools of thought here. On one side, you have the inclusion model. Think of this as making sure everyone has a seat at the big table, working on the same stuff as their classmates. On the other side, you have the explicit model. This is more like targeted physical therapy, zeroing in on specific weak spots to build them up. So one is about access and equity. The other is about remediation and mastery. But here's the thing, these two ideas don't have to be at war with each other. In fact, the best approach uses both. The inclusion model is fantastic for Tier 1 instruction. That's the high-quality teaching that every student gets in the main classroom. But for the kids who need that extra boost, the explicit model is perfect for that targeted small group support to build up those missing skills so they can get back in the game and succeed. So, when you put it all together, when you combine context, affect, and cognition, what you get is a brand new final equation. It's one that totally redefines what MathCast is even for in a kid's life. And really, this is the big idea that ties everything we've talked about together. For so long, we've treated real-world problems as the dessert, something you get to do after you've eaten your vegetables of abstract math. This new model says that's completely backwards. Life skills, things like budgeting your allowance or following a recipe or building a fort, they aren't just an application of math. They are the pedagogy. They are the absolute best way to teach it in the first place. And that leaves us with one final big question. What if the goal of math class wasn't to create a room full of future mathematicians? What if instead the goal was to build capable, confident problem solvers for life? Because if we shift our focus away from the speed of calculation and towards the confidence to tackle a new challenge, we might just solve for a future where no one ever has to say, "I'm not a math person," ever again.